Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Youth Initiative High School's winter play, We Can But Try. My name is Zoe Drew-King. I wrote and directed this production. We are very excited to share this play with you. We have a few things to say before we get going. First of all, we would like very much to thank the Commons for working with us throughout this process. It's been such a joy to transform this space back to like theater red, which is so beautiful. So can we put our hands together for the Commons? As we are taking you back to the 1890s for this show, please turn off your cellular devices. They don't exist in our reality and will really confuse the characters if one goes off. We've already done it and that wasn't funny. Cool. We'll keep moving. We are working with both a photographer and a videographer for this production, so there will be tangible evidence this production exists. So please don't feel like you need to take your own photos or videos during this show. Speaking of film, this show implements a few camera flashes towards the end of the first act and the second act. It is not a strobe effect, but it will be bright and startling. You have been warned. You're welcome. We Can But Try is about 2.5 hours long, including intermission. There will be a 10-minute intermission. And if you need to use the restroom, there are 2 single-stall bathrooms outside in the cafe space. There will also be concessions available before the show, at intermission, and I believe after the show. Speaking of after the show, if you would like to congratulate the performers, they will make their way back to the cafe space, so you don't need to hang out in here. They just need to check out with me before they go. I would like to say a few things about the content of the show. We Can But Try is grounded in the half-remembered, half-forgotten times of snug Victorian illusion that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote through and set his beloved stories in. For all those in the audience who, like me, grew up with a love of detective stories and solving mysteries, I hope this is a captivating tale. For all those in the audience who, like me as well, come to understand that not everything can be solved, saved, or settled as cleanly as those stories make it seem, I hope this honors that complexity. Let this little drama about loss, love, and life move you in this ephemeral moment we share together. It has been such a privilege to work with this very talented cast and crew and to hold with gratitude everyone who has supported this production. Such a joy to bring this play to you all. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Last night, I'm still in shock.
It's impossible. What's the money you because of the class?
It wasn't just Watson, though. They mentioned the experts.
Not that there's any expert that Sherlock Holmes.
But such a dramatic image.
Reeling over the edge, locked in each other's arms.
I suppose the stories will cease.
How could it?
Well, Moriarty is a worthy adversary. He's the most dangerous criminal.
No, I mean,
Doyle?
the audacity.
I can tell you one thing right now.
Subscription canceled. But the bodies, there's no conclusive proof without the bodies. I can't believe it.
You can't just pick and choose what to believe with these things. He's written less reliable conclusions before.
Still, I want to see the proof.
We'll never get it. Doyle tires of his consulting detective.
He just has such an attitude about readership. It's utterly unfair.
Well, it's not as if we're all sentimental figures who can't think critically about the material. Well, some of us are.
How dare you? I love Sherlock Holmes a perfectly normal amount. It's not like I've cried over his death or anything, because he's not real and that would be terrible.
I will never forgive that heartless
Bastard! You killed Sherlock Holmes!
I do beg your pardon. You must have me confused for someone else.
Don't deny it, Arthur Conan Doyle. I like your trip to Switzerland of late. That's where you got the inspiration for the final problem.
That I cannot deny, Sir Henry. Tumultuous this seemed the perfect place to put Holmes to rest.
Along with more writing, but what if Dr. Watson?
Holmes went to confront Moriarty without telling Dr. Watson. How could he? How could you?
We will never get to see how Watson has defended him against Moriarty's champions who are attacking him posthumously. Such a dear and loyal friend. You have done him wrong, Mr. Doyle. Grievous wrong.
The country grieves, Mr. Doyle. How do you know hearts?
Let's save my mind for better things, even if it means I must bury my pocketbook with him.
Coward!
Come, the purchase at this grand afternoon. Our mind shall be known.
He just can't stop thinking about all the people he's left behind.
And Holmes himself, what a loss.
I remember those final lines so clearly. He's a man whom I shall ever regard as the best and the wisest man I have ever known.
John, your papers.
Indispensable as always, Mrs. Hudson.
Known you for years, John. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you, Martha.
Well, I don't think anything up for you. After your wife back helping you do things.
She's only just returned from her trip to the continent. I hardly think she'll make it this morning.
I'm here, John.
Ah, I see. Well,
It's good to see you, Martha.
you as well.
This looks like the state of affairs at Make. Absolute shambles. John, maybe you again.
Breathe here in the nick of time, John.
What's that?
Just saw your pigeon slip in. Looking a bit out of breath. Mind you, we didn't nearly miss the stop ourselves.
Holmes even attend church. Suffer little children come unto me.
Hey, look, it's the Lamb of God with the Lamb of God. Think Sherlock would like that one, Watson? I'm sure he'd say something disdainful.
This is the church where we were wed. I didn't know where else to go.
Well,
That.
that's... I don't recognize them, Watson. Is the memorial made public?
Oh, I mean no harm. I'm simply an old friend.
Voice. Something's familiar about that voice.
I once bid you good night from the street, Doctor. I doubt you'd remember much about me, but perhaps you'd recognize my features? Mr. Holmes. They don't know who I am, do they?
Evidently not, Mrs. Norton.
Face, I've seen it many times before. I can't recall the occasion.
Dearly beloved, I invite you now to take your seats. Thank you all for coming today to honor the life and legacy in witnessing to Christ and serving his holy cause. And having our causes thusly witnessed, it seems, we gather here today to eulogize one Sherlock Holmes.
Not Holmes.
Thank you, but that's quite enough.
Mr. Holmes, many apologies. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, at the behest of one Dr. Watson. A somewhat unorthodox request, I might add, given that his body has not yet been
Father, we thank you for your graces in allowing us this space. I dare say your services will not be necessary for the duration of this gathering. Rest assured, you will be compensated for your time. However, might I continue with the introductions? Thank you. It is spoken true, the unconventional nature of this memorial. The truth, his estate specifies no services be held public or private, but, to put it bluntly, funerals for the living. So, Dr. Watson has graciously employed my assistance in coordinating this small ceremony. You've all received your assignments? Excellent. Might I then invite Dr. Watson? Would you like to make the first remarks?
I say, lay your hands out, good doctor.
Means no harm, you bloody shunter.
What did you just call my partner?
You heard him, Bobby.
It's Tobias Gregson, you adult pig!
All of you. Dear friends, you have been invited at my behest. I know Mr. Holmes held you in high esteem, and your services have been invaluable and often ignored by these fine officers. However, if you are unable to keep a civil tongue in your heads for our sake, please do so for the sake of Mr. Holmes's memory. Thank you. John, would you? Oh, it is. I do not. This assembly did not need to hear my defenses. We all, many of us, it is in our hearts that this stand bears witness to a life most extraordinary. Though I had not known the deceased the longest, I had the immense pleasure of accompanying him
on numerous adventures that have enriched my life beyond wildest measure. It was through our partnership that my understanding of the world was expanded. I even met my beloved wife, Mary.
This is mortifying.
Dr. Watson, if you don't mind, Detective Lestrade would like to do that there.
Yes, very well.
Sherlock was saying about abduction too.
Sherlock?
Yes, as Sherlock was saying, and even eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
But I could have sworn that chap, it looked just like Sherlock.
This is impossible, my friend. She like here in von Funeral, we must eliminate from our reasoning.
But what if it is the improbable truth instead? Just think, Tamo, just think. What if Sherlock killed Moriarty and faked his death to avoid being pursued by his criminal empire to protect John?
Good afternoon. Now, what would two young rapscallions be doing outside on an occasion such as this?
We were just,
You ought to be careful. People might think you're up to something.
Well, as you all know, my partner Gregson and I have employed the services of Mr. Holmes on a few occasions on our tenure with Scotland Yard. And if you'll excuse me a moment, I found myself of late seemingly overexerted.
Yes, well, compose yourself. Throughout the course of our duties, Holmes fulfilled his consulting detective role exactingly.
I often found that Mr. Holmes, quite frustratingly, was able to draw conclusions to a scene with an alarming speed, and that his conclusions were often well beyond the realm of standard police work. He had a clear, unbiased mind, able to look past what one would see on the surface and ignore suggestions of stereotype. My partner Gregson and myself, of course, would have come to the same conclusion.
Oh, come now, Greg. Not always.
Tobias, what are you doing?
It does us no good to reflect inaccurately on the past. I myself can think of a number of times where you'd arrested the wrong man. The Trevor affair?
Yes. So, politely returned by Dr. Watson. What was that? Scarlet letter?
A study in Scarlet.
Yes. The whole case was such a puzzler that we invited Mr. Holmes to the house where Mr. Trevor's body was discovered.
No robbery, no wound upon the body.
And of course, I get to discover the writing on the wall.
Raj.
What a foolish conclusion you drew.
Well, how was I to have known to look for German words? And with a murdered American on the line, I ask you, such impossible conclusions.
Well, this is beyond the point of our retelling. To put it plainly, Lestrade and I were in competition over this case.
I myself had concluded a political motive and had gone off to find Mr. Trevor's private secretary, Sanderson.
Well, I pursued an alternate theory in regards to Mr. Trevor's lodging. The deceased was apparently quite a crude man, his manners toward the maidservants disgustingly free and familiar.
It was the house mistress's daughter that became the focus of his unwarranted attention, though, was it not?
Though the lady of the house pitied her daughter and warned her to stay away from that man, they found themselves quite desperate for money, and so did not cast Mr. Sanderson out immediately.
Her son Arthur, though, with a violent temper, no alibi.
He knew of Mr. Trevor's death and volunteered as much when we confronted him. It all seemed to fit uncommonly well.
Uncommonly well is right. I found that my trail quite literally went cold when I discovered the body of Mr. Stangerson, murdered with the same Raj written in blood above him.
A pattern that baffled us, as well it should, but this would only become clear when the murderer gave his amicable confession. Lestrade, now is when I must remind you to tell the story as it happened. Lestrade, we found ourselves at Baker Streets, quite dismayed at Lestrade's recollection of the murder.
When suddenly Holmes had a visitor.
Yes, my good man?
2 visitors.
I beg your pardon.
Mr. Holmes had 2 visitors, myself as a cabman.
Yes, that's quite right, Greg. Quite right indeed. Your name again?
Wiggins, sir.
Whoa, no! We don't ever tell coppers our full name, Wig.
If you don't mind, gentlemen, while you acknowledge Wiggins' involvement in your case.
Hornswoggling blunderbusses.
We think we've seen him.
And the priest is...
Next dramatic break, I say we make for the exit.
credit is due to this chap for bringing the caddy into the room, which I might add took us all quite by surprise.
Like an illusionist, however.
Holmes managed to both handcuff the gentleman and reveal his true nature, that of one Jefferson Pope, the accused murderer of Mr. Stangerson and Mr. Trevor.
You can't deny he's got style.
You should have, Watson, you remember the drama that unfolded, right? The man ran to the window and, what's the word?
Demonstrated himself.
Quite right, Mrs.
Mrs.
Yes, Mr. Hope attempted defenestration, but we were on him like static hounds, holding him down until...
And, well, with that, Sherlock declared that we reached the end of the case. Oh, quite tiring it was. I forget the details exactly, but I do remember the ring at the scene being of a young woman who died tragically after being forcibly married off to the deceased.
This young woman. What was her name?
The name escapes me. Laura?
Lucy, I think it was. Lucy Fair.
Quite right, Mrs. Hudson. Mr. Hope had been enamored of Miss Ferrier, and a good companion to her father, who was murdered, despite Mr. Hope's best efforts to help them both move out of Mormon territory.
Those dastardly Mormons.
What's a Mormon?
It's an organized religion founded just a few decades ago by an American man named Joseph Smith, who claims to have found 2 books of the Christian Bible carved into gold tablets on his property.
Those are wonders to behold.
So, Smith has seen them.
We've had quite enough of interruptions.
I mean to interrogate the nature of this crime, including Mr. Hope's motives. You say he carried Miss Ferrier's wedding ring?
Oh, indeed, and how heartbreaking to carry the ring of his beloved.
How did he get the ring?
Well, he said he took it from her body, so she wouldn't have to be buried as the married property of Mr. Trevor.
I am just sure. And were Mr. Hope and Miss Ferrier ever engaged?
I believe Mr. Hope and Mr. Ferrier had some agreement on the matter before his end, and Mr. Hope spent much time with the family and would have led them to safety had they not been ambushed by the Mormons.
Those dastardly ones. We spoke, you know. Miss Norton, is it? To your point.
I mean to suggest that Mr. Hope has found himself drawn to the simplest and cheapest of motivations for any crime of violence.
How do you mean?
Mr. Hope suggests in his confession that he murdered Mr. Trevor and Mr. Stangerson in retribution for the untimely death of Miss Ferrier. Correct?
He spoke to no other incitement, except perhaps the death of her father, but he mentioned this only in passing.
And yet, Miss Ferrier remains voiceless in this whole affair. I simply mean to suggest that Mr. Hope has justified his murderous intentions with a seemingly noble cause, one that the event had no investment in.
She could have loved the gentleman. She was promised to him by Mr. Hope, well, to Mr. Hope, by her father.
And then by a different hand of force promised to another. Miss Ferrier's true feelings never known. How could it be fair for Mr. Hope to say he acts on her behalf?
What then would you define as his motive?
His own ego, his own rage, his fear of mortality.
That would further explain the fearful manner in which he poisoned Mr. Trevor.
Holding one poisoned pill, one harmless one, and forcing the decision upon him, while keeping the other pill himself.
Leaving the man to be poisoned, and Mr. Trevor free to cause further harm, as it seemed he would have by all accounts.
The man wished for death, and cared not who, if anyone, he brought down with him. His increasingly violent actions, including throwing himself from the Baker Street apartment window, show nothing but escalating desperation for the end, wrapped up in a fear of what dreams may come.
I believe you to be quite right, Mrs. Norton. I wonder why Holmes never mentioned this in his reasoning.
Can we return, foremost, to how you came to know the details of this case? You seem intimately familiar with this affair.
Why, Inspector, you yourself have laid out all the evidence before us. I simply deduced further than Mr. Holmes did.
But the poison, his fear of death.
Evidence in the mentioning of the aortic aneurysm.
But
Mr. Holmes, to his credit, deduced correctly that a politically motivated murder would have cut and run from the scene, rather than pacing about like Mr. Hope evidently did.
Something that became quite instrumental to us in future cases.
He did always call you both the pick of a bad lot. How did In elementary, Dr. Watson. I've always followed your stories.
Well, I suppose that concludes our little tale. I always thought how it was a blessing that Sherlock was on the side of the force and not against it. Told him as much. Although, in hindsight, I fear I may not have told him enough.
It's beyond my wildest imagination that Holmes is gone. For such a clever mind to have been outwitted, and for him to find himself in such a position alone.
Perhaps the design of the occasion is also beyond your wildest imaginations, Detective.
Inspectors and Mrs. Norton, I thank you for this reminiscence on my brother's behalf. At this time, I'd like to invite a dear friend and longtime associate of Faces Manheim to say a few words.
Oh, thank you, my pal. Such a kind heart. Did you know I am the first landlady with the boys in London? Not at Baker Street, of course. I acquired that property in the 70s. Or was it 80s? Well, it must have been by 1880 because you and Sherlock moved in 1881, John. What a mess you made of the place. Remember that little pup you had, John?
Oh, Gladstone! Oh, dear Gladstone. Oh, I almost forgot how he howled when Sherlock would play the violin. Oh, yes, you're quite right. He just made a proper mess of the place immediately.
Placing that rug in the hallway nearly doubled your rent for the first month. Well, it's all wrong now. Did John have a daughter in the matter?
Certainly not. In fact, I've never heard of him or Sherlock speak of this Gladstone. Not heard.
Like I said, I was my pop's landlady, and his brothers too, for that matter, when they moved to London. After a fashion, I took to looking out for the Holmes boys. Nothing exceptional, of course. I dare say any good property owner would ensure the comfort and safety of their tenants.
Calm down, Beth. You are significantly more maternal than my current landlord, and for good reason. Sherlock in particular had quite a habit of coming and going at odd hours, and with his unsavory habits.
Kept him alive, which is more than the rest of us can say.
This I will not stand for, Mrs. Norton, whoever you are.
You really don't recognize me, John? You know, I never held it against you for throwing a smoke bomb into my rooms, but your inability to recognize me when my picture has been in your sitting room for nearly 10 years feels personal.
Irene Adler.
Oh, woman! Irene Adler! I wonder if she's here to confess her undying love for Sherlock.
Don't be such a jollyhead, she's married.
So?
Small potatoes, lads, small potatoes. What are we gonna do about the priest?
I trust Lestrade and Gregson about as far as I can throw them.
Richard Gregson is twice your height.
That's my case not far at all.
It doesn't matter. How do we find out more about him?
I could nick his wallet.
Not bad, but I've got a better idea. Remember I told you I thought I saw him?
If it's really him, it might be risky to approach. Not saying we shouldn't, but
Hold on,
some of us can stay here and keep watch.
I'll be back in a jiffy.
Let me come with you. We can sim over the rest of this time.
Was Irene Adler, now is Miss Irene Norton. While God sends his regards, my husband's business overseas prevented him from traveling into this charade of hero.
You've only come to insult this affair. Why come at all? I certainly didn't invite you.
I did. Mrs. Norton has been an incomparable confidant in my business as well as Sherlock's since their paths first crossed. Something I hope you might understand, John. He was beloved and supported by many more than just you. Your disdain over these proceedings is noted, Irene. Glorification of detective stories, collected adventures, told with fond reminiscence, but we all grieve in different ways. Please allow it. My good sir, perhaps you would humor us with some scripture to revitalize our purpose here? A homily, perhaps?
Yes, the homily. The Book of Lamentation. How appropriate as we lament the loss of Mr. Holmes. Now, loss can mean many things. Perhaps he's been split. Perhaps he has hit his head and is now wandering about the woods. But I digress. Lamentation! This is from Jeremiah. Remember my afflictions and my wanderings, the wormwood
gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within. But this I call to mind, and I have hope. For the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him.
I'm scared to approach him. What if he doesn't want to see us?
How upset could he be? He trained us after all, and he can only be disappointed in his own methods.
I suppose you're right.
Excuse me, young sir. You must have mistaken me for someone else.
Where do you think you're going?
Now, we don't know why he's trying to fake your death.
And we don't really care.
Goodness, this must be the desert sun concocting some illusionary mischief.
You're quite well, Sherlock.
I suppose this is a good cue as any to retire from my efforts. I should not have obliged my alma mater with the request for another Holmes piece. It has quite addled my already preoccupied brain.
What nonsense is this? A Holmes piece?
Tea Leaf, I don't think this is Sherlock Holmes, but rather some fabricator.
You must be the Baker Street irregulars. Always clattering about my mind, you are, dear urchins creeping through the shadows. Small wonder you found me here.
Who are you? And what have you done with Sherlock?
My name is Arthur Conan Doyle. I don't expect you to comprehend this, but I am the author and sole originator of Sherlock Holmes. His adventures, his life, even you.
Oh, so you mean we've somehow passed from our plane of existence, in which we are fictional beings in your head, into your subconsciousness?
And that you thought this was too complex for our minds to comprehend?
Well, I do believe you articulated the facts of the matter even more clearly than I see them myself. Yes, I see you as figments of my imagination. But who's to say I myself am not some character within a narrative far greater than any of us?
How can we know?
I suppose the question is, instead, what brings you here to me? I assume the veil between our worlds is made thin by my preoccupation with this little pastiche.
The Field Bazaar? What is this, Tommy Rot?
To conclude, we look again to verse 25, where Jeremiah says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him." Like I said before, in the morning, the love of God is good. Morning, of course, a metaphor. The Lord is good to those who wait. Those who wait for a good God are not bored, and they are not tired of waiting, and they do not feel their grief, their lamentation, their sadness. If you wait for God, God will be good, and a good God is godly and good like
I think that's quite enough. You have the boss in front of your audience. And I do believe that Martha had not concluded what she was prepared to share with us.
Ah, of course. Mrs. Hudson, if you'd be so kind.
My, what strong muscles you have.
How pathetic to support my congregation then.
Well, I believe I was talking some nonsense about being a landlady, which came about some years ago after I came to a small fortune, which is neither here nor there, as I have been asked here today to share a favorite case of mine with the assembly. Here we all are, reliving stories like John does. Such a lark to look back, and I so often find that this is one of my favorite cases because no crime technically was committed. No murder, no disappearance. Well, not really. I suppose I'd better let you in on what I mean to discuss. I am speaking of the case of Lord St. Simon's disappearing wife.
Oh.
Yes, a most remarkable episode. Bride mysteriously vanishes. The husband's former paramour is brought in for questioning.
The woman had made a scene the day of the wedding.
And had been seen walking with the man after the wedding. And Miss Miller's excuse that the bride had slipped away into a pub was corroborated by none.
Well, until it was revealed that that's where her first husband was staying. What? I thought that we all knew how the story goes. Is that a secret?
That is beyond the point, John. It's not your turn.
Quite all right.
It's sorry to interrupt again, Mrs. Hudson. It certainly is not. I believe your time has already been diminished by selfish interruptions.
Mrs.
And I think it high time for you to be allowed to continue telling your story.
Mrs. Hudson. Martha. Please do accept my apology. I allowed myself to get caught up in the story. It's one of my favorites as well.
Understandably, John, as it happens so close to your own naturalist. Not to marry.
Martha, it's of no surprise to me that John was married before.
I didn't mean to cause any pain.
We're at a funeral, Martha. The air is thick with it.
Oh. Well, I don't mean to make light of how you all are feeling, but I'm determined to conclude this story. I remember the extremely confrontational dinner when the stuffy Lord St. Simon came to Baker Street, and Mr. and Mrs. Francie came over turned out to explain themselves. Such an uncomfortable scene for the new husband it was. Pudding was, how do you say?
A fait accompli.
Thank you. I've always wanted to return to my French. A fait accompli for Lord St. Simon, as it were. He had already been paid the dowry for Miss Hattie Dorn, as he knew her, which, coming from a California millionaire, made a difference to the Lord, who, despite his title, was not at all. But, as it came to light, Miss Dorn was not a widow, as she believed, and as she discovered when her husband, thought to be killed years ago in New Mexico, turned up in the church at the wedding. So, very understandable that she would flee her reign from Lord St. Simon, and perfectly logical to seek out her husband at his lodgings. As Dr. Watson pointed out earlier, this is where she disappeared off to. Yes, Detective Inspector?
Holmes later revealed to us that he discovered their lodgings by assessing the notes slipped to Miss Durant, rather Miss Miller, which had a hotel bill on the back. I had previously dismissed its contents. It did not immediately convey the lodging situation.
A deductive process we have since used in our own cases. It seems with each case, Holmes taught us something new. I, for one, would never have thought to look for parallel instances of missing husbands returning.
Nor I, but Sherlock had referenced cases in Aberdeen and Munich, cases that had captured his interest and seemed to line up suspiciously well.
Now, if anyone had asked the woman initially,
Quite right you are. Miss Mole never intended to hurt Lord St. Simon, truly would have been very happy as his wife, had it not been for the impossible and unexpected discovery of her husband returning. Nothing else could have moved her from his side, and she told as much to Lord St. Simon. Rather rudely, I think, he did not stay to dinner. He found himself poor again, having returned the dowry now owed to Mr. Moulton. I dare say, he has enough privileges in the House of Lords without it.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson.
Of course. I think that note from Mr. Moulton is somewhere in Baker Street still. I do an excellent job of keeping rooms tight, John. I know you've had words with Mycroft about this. But everything is just as it was before you left for Switzerland. Not an item out of place. I have tuned his violin. You know, I've learned a thing or two over the years. Can't play the instrument, of course, but I take better care of it than Sherlock does.
Mrs. Hudson.
Does. Silly me.
Not him, not really, not like that.
the priest is found a priest. Colonel Moran. She's off her, or off her too. What on her?
Don't think about it too hard.
You know the danger he's left in the fictional world and Moran. Lost the sex into him.
In the opposite manner as Mark Antony, who seemed to have come here to praise Sherlock, not to bury him. But I'm not here to praise him. He received more praise than he deserved in life. Why should he be lauded further in death? I'm not saying he deserves no praise. His methods and efforts helped a great many people. Thankfulness is not praise. Sherlock himself demurred at the types of applause Watson and his readership heaped upon him. He despised celebrity. Well, you know that, John. Oh, not your intention, surely. Or perhaps it was. To raise an infallible genius to be adored by an audience of simpletons. I wonder, John, if you had never published A Study in Scarlet, and if you had never sensationalized my own private business, A Scandal in Bohemia, I ask you, and if you had never crafted a hero out of Holmes, would he still have gone to his death at Reichenbach? Men and their egos. Sherlock himself knew the risks of confronting Moriarty outside of the law, something Moriarty wanted but served to further endanger Sherlock. I warned him myself. If Holmes had not gone after Moriarty so personally, perhaps both men would have been brought to justice.
This is out of line.
John, please. Her anger is not about you.
He tests my word personally.
Never understood why Sherlock would have allowed it. Writing the
For you.
No, I'm sure you're not implying.
Not people.
And is it not reasonable that in just in this jungle? Perhaps it's more.
Not now.
Moriarty had business in New York about 10 years ago and came to one of my performances. Cold as the grave his hands were, well, are, I'm sure, now as well. Since then, I followed his criminal career, never interfering. It is astounding how much you can overhear when you choose not to draw attention to yourself as a woman. Sherlock valued this inherent ignorance paid to those on the fringes of society in his own disguises. This nearly fooled me in our first encounter, though I'd been warned of his involvement months before. Well, months later, as we found ourselves working alongside the Pinkertons, I did my best, John, to save the life of Bertie Edwards. Moriarty has countless assassins in his employ, as, well, you know, his right-hand man, Colonel Moran.
God, they do not get worse. And here I am, saddled with an ingrate juvenile.
That is Mr. Burgess, ingrate juvenile to you, my good sir.
If you look at the vagabonds and regulars that's taking root in my subconscious now.
Right you are. And we're not leaving until you agree to bring Mr. Holmes back.
I hate to break it to you, child. Mr. Holmes is well and truly dead.
Do you have the power to change that? You even wrote him into a new story.
A non-canonical bit of whimsy will only bring strife to my already conflicted mind. I'm burdened by affairs I can't even begin to imagine.
Affairs, you say? You married?
I am.
And in love with another? People are simple, Mr. Doyle. Tragic, but simple.
I could not have said that better myself. Now, will you please disentangle yourself from me so we can have a proper conversation?
I suppose so.
Yes, Sherlock and I worked together. More times than you would care to know, and I solved a far number of cases quicker than he did. But you're expecting me to discuss one. A single adventure. Well, like I said, I'm not here to praise Sherlock. He could have inquired at the nature and circumstances of the photograph he was paid so handsomely to retrieve. And yes, John, I know he didn't take the money. Such a noble gesture. Perhaps if the wise Sherlock Holmes had inquired at the nature and circumstances of the photograph, he would have discovered what about it was so damaging to his reputation. A photograph of the two of us. One I threatened to share with his future wife, the princess. Well, what could have led to its contents? Who could have taken the photograph, and where did they factor into this scandal? But true to his sex, Sherlock questioned not the king's motivations. Such Victorian modesty in his approach. I do regret that I was not as strong in my vengeful resolve to fully prevent his marriage to the princess. I do believe he should not have been allowed to marry, nor permitted to lay his hands upon another woman ever again. The photograph? The photograph is proof of the king's sadistic nature. He feared it being revealed because it illuminates him as the perpetrator of violent abuse. I'm fine now. I was not in my youth. Well, I met Godfrey while courting the king. An outside perspective on our relationship, and a brilliant legal mind. He meant the world to me. I was trapped within my own mind and by circumstances within the court, and I could not find a means to end my affair with the king, other than desperate measures. He helped me leave the country and made sure I was well in body and mind before pursuing my singing career. Even waited till I initiated courtship to express his romantic feelings for me. But I never planned to propose under pressure from Sherlock or the king. But in my heart, I knew I was ready. But once we decided to giddily elope and bring Sherlock, who we knew was following us, into the ceremony, it was an irresistible momentum. I love and am loved by a wonderful man, a partner in all my endeavors, and I'm grateful for his understanding and support in my investigatory pursuits with Sherlock. Few are able to accept that deep friendship and admiration can bloom between two without romantic inclination, but that has always been true for me and Mr. Holmes. Oh, and Mr. Holmes the senior, of course. But that goes without saying. Or maybe he doesn't. My prof may allow for further insight into this matter. Well, that's my story of Sherlock. A partner in many cases, a bright young man who should have listened to me. I know what it is to look into the soul of a dangerous man and know you cannot defeat him alone. He should have listened to me. And for God's sake, he should have taken me with him, John. Sometimes it's love alone that can save us from ourselves. Mary!
Wait, Dr. Watson! Listen to what we have to say.
Now it's not the time for your interruption.
I think the ceremony has been interrupted enough. I can quite finish this matter.
It's Mrs. Norton for the last time!
There, Martha, don't cry.
Or do. It's important to show your feelings, Tino.
Dr. Watson, if you could please go comfort your wife so we can move this along.
Honestly, I don't think that John is the right person to talk to Mary right now.
She is my wife. I am responsible for the pain she is experiencing. It is only I who can alleviate her pain. I know she needs to hear. I'm afraid that if I say it, it'll only make things worse.
So naturally, you're choosing to do nothing, to say nothing. How like you, Doctor, to choose the path of least resistance.
Bit harsh, Mrs. Norton.
It's true. If you'd ever said or done anything as a doctor to treat his habits with narcotics
And stimulants.
Oh, so this is where we've come to blame. Really, just like Mrs. Norton, do you all hold me responsible for Sherlock's death?
We therefore commit this body, but if there was one, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. What's this next part?
In sure and certain hope of resurrection to eternal life. What? I read.
Is that your hope, Father? That Sherlock be resurrected to eternal life?
Oh, surely it is the hope of all priests that his holy flock be so.
Can we please discuss this very real possibility? What on earth do you mean?
Resurrection, eternal life for Sherlock.
This is ludicrous.
Would you just listen to what we have to say?
No doubt some resurrectionist nonsense, desecrating and...
Hey, it's not. The author, he's real. We can talk to him.
The author? You mean Watson? Albeit a poor author.
No, the originator. It's hard to explain. Will you just follow us?
Now's as good a time as any. My wife's gone, and next up is my prop, who didn't like Sherlock.
Ah! That's enough from all of you. You regulars, pursue this theory if you will, but leave us in peace while you do. The rest of you, you would be seated. I will begin. I've had the unique opportunity to have known Sherlock since birth, and am, despite having no desire to be so, the only remaining Holmes left to tell the tales of his life outside of what has been so elaborately described by Dr. Watson. True to the intentions of this evening, however, I will keep to form and share but a brief glimpse into one of the cases we shared, not the full extent of the life we were so fortunate enough to share together. Sherlock was a private man, myself even more so. I will not dishonor his memories. In memoriam. On the first occasion that John was invited to the Diogenes Club with Sherlock, I'd invited my brother to consult on a complex kidnapping. The victim was returned unharmed, but shaken after having been forced to translate for a much more unfortunate man under significant threat by unsavory characters unknown to the victim. The Greek interpreter, John called it, a rather uninventive title, but to the point. Mr. Mellis, close acquaintance of mine, then joined us to tell his story as the named protagonist in this tale.
How close an acquaintance, Mycroft?
I hardly think this is the time to muck right, Mrs. Hudson. Particularly of our present company.
Oh, please. Like Mycroft doesn't have more power than all of Scotland Yard combined. Sherlock always did say that the Diogenes Club was the queerest club in London, and Mycroft one of the queerest men. I wonder if Mr. Mealis was a member of that club as well.
What is Martha talking about?
Mr. Mellick was my friend. I use the past tense here not because he is no longer with us, but because he is no longer my friend. I share this not to deviate from the plot, but to add clarity.
Well, that answers that question. I apologize, my dear. You know how vicariously I live through others' affairs of the heart.
Not at all, Mrs. Hudson. I suppose the rest of this tale will be compelling fodder for your conversation then. Irene has since described this case as the unnecessary interference of men in the private affairs of women. The man for whom the translating was being conducted was the brother of a young Greek woman who had eloped against his wishes, which landed the two of them in some trouble with some unscrupulous gentlemen.
Ah, this explains why you failed to involve Detective Lestrade and I in your investigation. Blackmail is a gray area within our purview and is often best handled by consultants, so as not to endanger the victim.
Sure, that's the only reason I didn't call upon you to buy it.
I must admit, while I see your perspective, I've only ever seen this as a case of siblings desperately trying to look out for one another. In the end, the brother met an untimely end, but there's strong reason to believe that the sister took her revenge on the men who killed him. To me, this case is an example of the bond between siblings. It reminds me dearly of my brother. When we first moved to London, we were all we had in the world. Work satiated part of our curious minds, but we were always of the mind to see more, to do more, to plumb the depth and breadth of the wide world. We were voracious readers and listeners, but more importantly, observers of the human condition. Sherlock chided me always for not applying these talents as he chose to, but my brother had a noble sensibility, rather principled sense of justice. This was always true, not just after his adventures were serialized and shared with the public, and though he rarely connected this with any religious inclinations or statements of purpose to his clients, Sherlock was extremely virtuous. Strong Gregson, you observed this well with gratitude on several occasions that he chose to use his gifts on the side of the law. But as Irene noted, this became a dangerous path to walk, especially as he encountered dangerous foes. It is in the nature of an addict to build up a tolerance and dependence on the sensory. But the thrill of the chase, as we know, is not always enough for my brother.
Even though he was living with a doctor,
That is enough, Martha. John made advisements as a physician, confronted Sherlock on multiple occasions about his habits, and never enabled him by making excuses for his behavior. While his boundaries could have been firmer, allowing him to hit rock bottom, no one here bears the burden of responsibility for convincing Sherlock to abandon his drugs. Thank you, Mary.
Mary was right. Sherlock was smart enough to know the risks of his behavior, but clever enough to convince himself the value of his actions. His mind rebelled against the stagnation, but beyond the substances he used, the greatest high of all for my brother was a well-deserved victory, where good triumphs over evil, where all is said and done. It is in encouraging this mentality that I failed him as a brother. I do not see the world in such a dichotomous manner. There are many things deemed worthy of praise that look a flower when have at their heart a serpent under it. There are expressions of love, of identity, that have been condemned as evil. There are more things in heaven and earth, Sherlock, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. But as any of you know, to convince my brother to refrain his own sense of right and wrong was as impossible a task as protecting him from harm. I would have done anything to save my brother. I wish I could have. Now, I have no earthly idea I'm expected to carry on the only remaining homes of two lonely, confirmed bachelors.
Mary. It is not my custom to prepare speeches, to introduce my feelings to a crowd, even a familiar one. The vast majority of my wealth and friendship sits within these walls. My former employer, Mrs. Forrester, well beloved, is no longer with us, and I was orphaned long ago. I have no other kin. For much of my adulthood, I faced the reality of life alone as a single woman, a governess, content with my future as a spinster. With the exception of an extraordinary anonymous gift from time to time, my days were simple, and I was glad of it. Were it not for Mrs. Forrester's heavy-handed convincing, I would have scarcely sought out the services of the esteemed consulting detective to confront the mystery of my father's disappearance. I hesitate to say this, but if not now, when? I wish to God that I had not found myself on Sherlock's doorstep that day. I fear it led to a series of events that have caused myself and others much misery and strife, and have ultimately led to Sherlock's demise. I blame myself for his death. Please, allow me to explain what is no doubt an absurd premise. I do not have words as articulate as Mycroft, nor am I as impassioned as Irene or Martha. I have taken much time to explain to myself the pain in my heart, and I fear if I do not say my reasoning aloud, it will break in quiet, without ceremony. John, I love you. I always will. I did not love you when you asked me to marry. Allow me to explain. You speak in riddles, Mary. You love me, you love me not. You cannot deny that your courtship began with the abruptest of terms. I know you found me cold and distant, but the treasure, yes, the treasure, the impassable barrier that sealed your lips. Not throw my words back against me. I beg of you. Not in spite, John. I am not angry with you. It has been through your writing that I have come to know you better. You spoke of how you struggled to contain your affection for me from the start. Your exclamation of my attractiveness felt almost out of character for the narrator who had previously little remarked on your client. Who loved but not at first sight? I suppose in your case, Mr. Shakespeare was wrong. It's Marlowe. Over here? That's the Christopher Marlowe poem. Shakespeare's is "With my heart left now, forswear sight." For I ne'er saw a true beauty till this night. Quite right you are. I know how fond Sherlock was of the bard, but Marlowe was his contemporary and lover. Perhaps not. William Shakespeare had a wife, children too, both lovers and lovers, both women and men. A crime punishable by death until the 1860s, I might add, a gross indecency now as well, an act most abhorrent to the public eye. They realize these things. Well, Mary, I cannot divorce fear from these logical arguments. Can we put this aside for now? May I ask you a question, straight to the point? Why on earth do you blame yourself for Sherlock's death? You were hurt when Sherlock did not congratulate you when I accepted your proposal. You wrote as much yourself, John. You cannot deny the facts of your own story. I fear he had disapproved of the decisions I had made. He did not, though. Charming, he called me. I did not marry you out of love, John. No, not at first. You had not been the first to ask. But I enjoyed your company more than most. Your noble profession and heartfelt passion spoke to me. Practicality, stability, unions have been knit for worser conditions. I loved you from the first, Mary. But in the interest of transparency, it served me well to have a wife for more reasons than one. I know, John. I came to understand this more and more as my love for you grew. I began to see, not only in the actions of your days, but in your writing, what drew you to his side, even to the final problem. You read his stories. They are yours, John, as well as his. I know you wrote them to please him. You say as much in writing.
I've saved every story you wrote for him, John. I've searched and I've scanned them for answers in every line.
Answers to what?
To the mystery you refuse to solve, even to this day. To whom does the stoic Dr. Watson's heart truly belong?
The answer is a simple one. Or should be.
Then why do we avoid it so?
Because I do not wish to cause you harm.
Cause. John, you cannot begin to imagine the depths to which I have allowed myself to grieve this without you saying it aloud. I have been angry, cruelly so, even so far as to wish Sherlock harm, and no, I am not so irrational to believe I willed his death, but even still.
Mary, this is shocking for you to confess such violent imaginings.
John, you have always seen the best in people. Composed and tactful in all you seem to do. Damsel in distress with gentle sensibility. You have not come to know the darker corners of my heart. I have not much to it.
But I ask you now, please, allow me to know how you have done it.
Do you remember what Irene said earlier today? When she said she wished you had gone up the falls with Sherlock?
Yes, I am not likely to forget. It has struck me to my core. Sometimes it is love alone that can save us from ourselves.
You do not have to answer this, John, but I wonder in my darkest moments, would I have been able to save you from heartbreak if you had not gone with Sherlock to the falls? Suppose I had insisted you accompany me to the continent. The news would have reached you. Or perhaps not. Perhaps one day you would have turned up to Baker Street, an accomplished private practitioner of medicine, to treat your old friend, Sherlock Holmes, come to terms finally with his addictions.
You could have never known, Mary. Is this how you hold yourself responsible?
I cannot help but think or wish that he would not have gone without you. And without Sherlock going, he could have found some other means to confront and capture Moriarty. With Mycroft or Irene, some greater hand of fate could have intervened. Had he gone, though.
I suppose the news would have reached London soon enough, of his disappearance at least, or capture, or slander involving his conduct chasing Moriarty. Though without his loyal documentarian by his side, it's impossible to know what kind of story it was told. And my heart would have been broken all the same.
I fear it would have grown worse. Had you not gone along with him. Your resentment of me for having prevented you from going would have destroyed any semblance of love left between us. And you would have never been able to forgive yourself.
To phrase it better, Mary, I will never forgive myself. Cannot. I should have known from the beginning, when I found him in my gone with him. Shaken. Bloody. He said to me then that my memoirs of him would draw to a close once he captured or extinguished the life of Moriarty. I took his meaning as retirement. He meant suicide. Mycroft. His pursuit of justice would have never been satiated. You could not have prevented him from finding another enemy after Moriarty. There would have always been some new thread to pull on, some hide to chase. Mrs. Norton, Irene. Even had I gone, you know well enough, he would have found some other means of preventing my involvement. He was a proud man, and I am a weak one. He broke my heart, leaving me behind. Mary, I know now, though, that my heart would have been broken by him through words or through deeds upon the cliff, through lies, through harmful words. I do not put it past him that he may have physically overpowered me in order to confront Moriarty alone. I'd like to think that he would have done so and believe that he did lie to me out of love. Martha, it is not due to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Our rooms, his rooms, they must come apart. You cannot maintain them as a mausoleum of his accomplishments. Sherlock, as shocking as it has found us, dear inspectors, Sherlock is dead. He is gone, and he is never coming back.
Actually, that may not be entirely true. Allow yourself to suspend your disbelief at this notion. Please, this is what we call a world as but a dream. A fiction created in the mind of one whose thoughts are wild and untamed.
How came you to this knowledge? If we are to believe our world is fiction, what access have we been granted to the originator's thoughts?
His turmoil makes the veil thin. He passes in and out of reality, dreaming himself as Sherlock.
Yes. The author is real. Can Sherlock be saved?
I might advise against this, for the dead shall not rise, so saith the Lord.
Keep your forked tongue behind your mouth, you witless worm!
You know you are Sebastian Moran.
It's Colonel, if you don't mind.
I think we mind very much. You regulars, is this what you intended to share at the start of our gathering?
It was, for these foozlers got involved.
I apologize for having interrupted you. It would have been much more benefit to have captured Iran earlier in our proceedings.
Thanks, Inspector.
Friends, are you serious in your claim that this author can be reached?
Yes. And if we intend to talk to him, we must do it swiftly. We don't know how much time might pass in the world.
He may forget us and Sherlock entirely.
Well, what are we waiting for?
The horror!
Abhor are on your own decision.
I'm tormented by the loss.
Readership, 20,000 candle subscriptions in the Strand.
I thought after my visit to Switzerland that the future became astoundingly clear. But at every turn, what I predicted to be a constant has been thwarted. Truly illness. I think in every case, you're like, is still the Lord finds it meaningful to torment me?
You have abandoned your children running off to war.
I have a duty to my queen and my country.
You have a duty to your family. You've forgotten Jean.
Our relationship is platonic. I was faithful. I have been faithful. I will continue to be faithful. Your heart betrays you, Arthur. The heart is a complicated thing.
Then love that lies not only in their hearts, but in their eyes.
I love Louisa, but I've fallen into different kind of love with Jean.
You cannot always be torn in two.
You must be one and whole for many years.
How can I move forward when I am drawn into the past?
Beyond the both against the current.
It is enough. I've had enough of home. I've had such an overdose of home that I feel person as I do for and taken to a cross, of which I must make too much, so that the name of it gives me a sickly feeling to this day.
Did you never think about Sherlock's addiction to pain to standing? How his death has ruined their lives?
Mycroft and Watson,
Here, if we have come to talk.
you are here for Sherlock.
Yes, it seems to be. You seem to be. Who are you?
Of course, introductions. I am, of course, familiar with you all. I created you, after all.
Blaspheme.
Drop the priest down, Moran.
It's not an act. This man claims the profane. Arcane power had untold. He created us. What hellish unreality do we find ourselves in?
Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? You must give me more credit, Greg. I'm more airhead than you.
I mean, how will this be? I'm flesh, I'm blood, I make choices, I make mistakes.
And predictably, Lestrade is late to the game of the philosophy.
Hey! What how dare you, sir? I say, what the devil?
Sherlock was clever. How do you think that you always came to solve the mystery in the nick of time? Steps behind Sherlock, of course, but you always got your man.
Why, despite your independent nature and inner confidence, you found yourself at Baker Street, finding your husband with the hand of fate that directed it. How? After so many years of playing housekeeper to a penniless doctor and his addict partner, you stayed in health and comfort with no clear income. Think, just think. The universe itself seems to be confirming your choices as you make them. A surgeon with a questionable, debilitating injury. I admit, I was a bit inconsistent with my descriptions of your war wound. But how can a man with such an indeterminate literary background always write the perfect story? Modestly successful, of course. Couldn't have you make too big a name for yourself.
Our lives are in your hands.
They are.
And Sherlock's? His, well, my, it's
Not quite. Mr. Doyle will do.
that of you. We got Sherlock. Oh.
Turmoil and chaos. We've been trying to tell you. Moriarty's criminal network runs free.
For all your talk of writing the perfect story, you sure did leave out a lot of loose ends. What a Moran!
I only knew that I had to continue serving Moriarty, even after his death. What was I doing? What am I doing?
In a relatively decent manner, I gave no consideration to any of your motivations after Sherlock's death. In fact, I didn't give any of you a second thought once Q was gone from the story. You never intended to return to our world, did you? I never did, Mrs. Watson. Your presence here is as surprising as the lightning above. You have wormed your way into the forefront of my mind, much against my will.
You really never thought to return. What about the rest of us?
Lives and everything that you care about is frivolous and grand scheme.
Oh, sure. Let's talk about your big problems, you second-rate writer.
Beg your pardon?
Just because you're part of your story doesn't mean that some of us don't like the way you've been telling it.
I always directed my anger at the ignorant patriarchal lens at Watson. Turns out I've had someone far lazier to blame all along.
You wrote my brother into an ending, undeserving of his talents.
You made Moriarty an undefeatable villain, with untold resources at his disposal.
Sherlock was smart enough to seek out advice and support from more than just Watson when the going got tough.
I refuse to believe that he would have just gone to Scotland Yard.
He and John had not gone alone. Our world would not have been broken.
We deserve for our world to be set right.
We demand to bring Sherlock back.
And if you don't,
You all are nothing more than scratches of ink on someone else's paper. My paper, my quill. I am vaster and more powerful than your entire universe. I am in charge. I am in charge. I say when characters are, when they're not. Look at all I can do without Sherlock. No, I can fix this. I can fix this without him. I'll prove it to you. What was Robinson talking about Norton? Desolate wilderness, high forest, remote, tranquil, unnatural stillness save from crime and tormented. Yes, this will do quite nicely. A murder mystery masterpiece without Sherlock. If we made it, we're all better off without him. Terrible catastrophe. Investigated by the Air Force United States. Yes, supernatural elements, of course. An escaped convict. Dangerous. Armed. His motives? Unclear. His whereabouts? Unknown. A groundsman? No, a naturalist. Someone to tell the story. But do they know more than what they seem? A sister. Dire warnings to the investigator. Untold violence. Fear. Yes. Supernatural. A caretaker of a long-abandoned estate finds the body of the old Sir Charles. Features convulsed in fear. And a little ways off, the footprints of a gigantic hound.
legend which foretells his creature so much. Some previous look evident might emerge from this account.
Very good, Doctor. Now, as I said before, Sir Charles took this record very seriously. His mind was prepared for such an end as it eventually needed. If you would like to peruse.
Certainly.
In the time of the Great Rebellion, this manor of Baskerville was owned by Hugo of that name. A most wild, profane, and godless man. This Hugo came to love, if so dark a passion may be known under so bright a name, the daughter of a yeoman who held lands near the Baskerville estate. The young maiden, being discreet and of good repute, would ever avoid him. So it came to pass that one Michaelmas, Hugo, with his idle and wicked companions, stole down upon the farm and carried off the maiden. When they brought her to the hall, they placed the maiden in an upper chamber, while Hugo and his friends sat down to a long carouse, as was their nightly custom. Now, the young lass upstairs was like to have her wits turned at the singing and shouting and terrible oaths which came to her from below. In the stress of her fear, she stole down the growth of ivy which covers, and still covered, the south wall, and so homeward across the moor, there being 3 leagues betwixt the hall and her father's farm. Some little time later, Hugo left his guests, to find the cage empty and the bird escaped. Then he sprang upon the great table, flagons and trenches flying before him, and he cried aloud before all the company that he would that very night render his body and soul to the powers of evil, if he might but overtake the rich. Hugo ran from the house, and giving the hounds a rebuke of the maids, ran off full cry in the moonlight over the moor. Everything was now in an uproar. The moon shone clear above the revelers as they took the course which the maiden once needs to have taken if she were to reach her own home. They had gone a mile or 2 when they passed one of the night shepherds upon the moorlands, and they cried to him, though they'd seen him not. As the story goes, the man was so crazed with fear that he could scarcely speak. But at last he said that he had indeed seen the unhappy maiden with the hounds upon her track.
But I have seen much more than that. As Hugo Baskerville passed me, there ran behind him such a hound of hell as God forbid should ever be at my heels.
Drunken squires cursed the shepherd, but soon their skin turned cold. They at last came upon the hounds, some slinking away, and some with starting hackles and staring eyes gazing down the narrow valley before them. The company had come to a halt. More sober men, as you may guess, than when they started. The moon shone clear above the clearing, and there, in the center, lay the unhappy maid where she had fallen, dead of fear and fatigue. But it was not the sight of her body, nor was it that of the body of Hugo Baskerville lying near her, which raised the hair upon the heads of those daredevil roisterers. But it was that. Standing over Hugo and plucking at his throat, there stood a foul thing, a great black beast, shaped like a hound, yet larger than any hound ever a mortal eye has rested upon.
Such is the tale, my sons, of the coming of the hound, which has plagued my family so sorely ever since. If I have said it then, it is because that which is clearly known hath less terror than that which is but that with. Nor can it be denied that many of my family have been unhappy in their deaths, which have been sudden, bloody, and mysterious. I counsel you, by way of caution, therefore, to forbear from crossing the moor in those dark hours when the powers of evil are exalted.
You must explain the legend which first tells us creatures. Creatures so hangers, the previous look evidence by emergence.
His fears were all the more confirmed in the weeks leading up to his death by the reports of several people who had seen a creature upon the moor which corresponded with the Baskerville demon.
You say this Sir Charles would have called this creature? Is it of your opinion that this was the principal cause of death? How unfortunate is it that that very night he left his house? What might have driven him to do so?
It's confoundingly unclear. Now, Doctor, I've called you to Baskerville Hall to deduce once and for all the cause of Sir Charles' death. I cannot fully believe it comes from supernatural means, but I'm hesitant to rule it out, knowing the curse upon my family. I'm asking you as a friend and as a man of science. I'm suspicious of this juncture, knowing that I am, by all accounts, the last of the Baskerville name.
Welcome to Baskerville Hall, Sir Henry.
Thank you, Mrs. Barrymore.
If I could give you a bowl, sir, I would like to discuss you retiring and leaving the war behind.
Ah, but of course, Mrs. Barrymore. But maybe you would be so kind as to stay while our guest is still here.
Yes, I never meant to suggest leaving right this minute.
Oh, of course. Well, if you wouldn't mind, I have some urgent business to attend to. Please make sure that our guest wants one thing.
Right this way then, Doctor.
Sit there. My apologies. Might I ask you a question about the Baskerville family?
Yes, of course, I suppose so.
I know so little about the history of the family, legend except, did Sir Charles have any other kin?
Yes, I believe so. Two brothers, Henry and Roger, Henry the youngest.
Henry Baskerville?
The father of our Grand Baron, yes.
What do you know of Roger Baskerville?
Not much, I'm afraid. He died quite young. He also looked, they say, quite like Hugo Baskerville. In looks as well as action.
Which makes us Sir Henry?
The very last of the Baskervilles. If I may be so bold, it would do well for this house to fall. I don't need to bring ill will upon Sir Henry, but with its past and all.
I do believe I get your meaning. A suspicious statement to say the least.
Beyond the windows of the manor, copses of trees moan and swing in a rising wind. A half moon breaks through the rifts of racing clouds. In the cold light beyond the trees lay a broken fringe of rocks and the long, low curve of the melancholy moor. The residents, weary yet wakeful, tossed restlessly, seeking for the sleep that would not come. Far away, a chiming clock sounded out the quarters of the hours, but otherwise, a deathly silence lay upon the old home.
A moderate walk along this moor path brings us to Merripit House. Come along, Sir Henry. You promised you would spare an hour so that I may have the pleasure of introducing you to my sister.
Mr. Simpleton, I'm wasting on long distance. We Baskervilles are natural sprinters, I think.
Only 2 years. The residents still call us newcomers.
We came here shortly after Sir Charles settled. May he rest in peace.
Thank you, Miss Stapleton. And how does country life suit you?
It is a wonderful place, the moor. You cannot think of all the incredible secrets which it contains.
It is so vast and so barren and so mysterious. You see those bright green spots scattered thickly over it?
That is the great Grimpen Mire. A false step yonder means certain death to man or beast. Only yesterday I saw one of the moor ponies wander into it. He never came out.
It is a bad place, the Great Grimpen Mire.
And you say you can penetrate it?
Yes, only a very active man can. So for God's sake, put the idea of trying your luck with it aside. You would not make it out.
It is only by remembering certain landmarks that he is able to do it.
What was that?
The peasants say that is the hound of the baskervilles calling for its prey. I've heard it once or twice before, but never quite so loud.
You are educated folk. Surely you don't believe such nonsense as that.
Bogs make odd noises sometimes. It is the mud settling or the water rising or something.
No, that was a living voice. Did you ever hear a bittern booming?
Perhaps you might be able to catch it for us, brother.
I suppose it is in my purview to seek out this rare bird. Practically extinct in all of England now. But anything is possible upon the moor.
Miss Stapleton, Farrell, if I may, I'm moved to say I feel the same. Ever since I met you a few days ago, I've been overwhelmed with feelings of affection.
Go back.
What?
You must go back to London instantly. I cannot say why, but for God's sake, you must do as I ask.
You don't understand. Please say you will see me again, so we may converse further.
Very well, but not a word of it to my brother. Might you fetch me an orchid from among the mare's tails yonder? We are very rich in orchids here upon the moor, but you are a bit late to see the beauties of the place. You are very hot, Jack.
Yes, I was chasing a cyclopedes. It's seldom found in the late August. What a shame I should have missed him. Sir Henry.
I must take my leave.
And I shall walk you to the end of the lane. I wonder, sir, if you've heard there's a convict escaped from Princeton wandering the moor. Dangerous criminal he is. No sight of him yet. But I would hate to hear if you encountered him upon the moor.
Mr. Stapleton, it appears you are threatening your baronet.
Hardly, Sir Henry. I'm but a simple entomologist, the lord of the manor. Such terrible circumstances led to Sir Thomas' demise. What a tragedy it would be to lose yet another Baskerville heir.
The longer one stays here, the more does the spirit of the moor sink into one's soul. Its vastness, but also its grim charm. All traces of modern England behind you, you're conscious everywhere of the homes and the work of prehistoric people. On all sides of you as you walk by the houses of these forgotten folk, their graves, and also their huge monoliths, which are supposed to have marked their temples. As you look at these gray stone huts against the scarred hillside, you leave your own age behind you. And if you were to see a skin-clad, hairy man crawl out from the low door, fitting a flint-tipped arrow onto the stringed bow, you would feel that his presence there was more natural than your own.
My apologies, Sir Henry, but I've just seen Miss Bear arguing staring to sing. She was standing in the window, almost giving a signal to someone out on the moor. My friend was seeing Baronet's quarters have shaded me from her place in the door. I am suspicious, though, given that she acts in secret and denies her tears. I would suggest that you and I confront her tomorrow evening, at the stroke of midnight, as is her custom. In the meantime, let us attempt to get our rest. Good night, Doctor. Good night. Well, what are you doing here?
Oh, heavens, sir, nothing, sir.
Come now, no lies. What are you doing at this window?
Oh, nothing. I was just wondering if I unlocked the window.
She must have been using it for a signal. Let us see if there's an answer. Aha! There it is. Look, the other one moves also. Who is your confederate out yonder? This is Barrymore, and what is this conspiracy that is going on?
I guess I shall not keep this a secret, and it will do me no good too. It's my brother. He's starving out on the moor, and I cannot let him perish at our very gates.
And your brother is?
Seldom a criminal, sir.
Mrs. Barrymore, would you object if we apprehended him?
Oh, heavens, no, sir. I haven't had the heart to do it myself, but I really wish you would be held accountable for his crimes.
Sir Henry, this venture heart is not for the faint of heart, but if this man had anything to do with Sir Charles' death, we must take him by surprise.
I wonder what Sir Charles would say to this. That great hour of darkness where evil is exalted.
That is the hound of the Baskervilles.
My God, can there be truth in all these stories? Shall we turn back?
No, Black Plunger. We've come to get our man, and we will do it.
Too soon found that they had no chance of overtaking the convict. In the moonlight, there appeared only a small speck, moving swiftly among the boulders on the side of the distant hill. The distance between them grew until, panting at their chase, the men stopped atop two rocks to watch it disappear into the distance. The moon was shining low upon the right, and the jagged pinnacle of granite tor stood up against the lower curve of its silver disk. There, outlined as black as an ebony statue on that shining background, a figure of a man appeared atop the tor. A tall, thin man, head bowed, arms folded, as if he were brooding over the enormous wilderness of peat and granite which lay before him. He might have been the very spirit of that terrible place.
It is to our benefit that we earn the friendship of Sir Henry.
Friendship is not affection, it is not romance.
And it is not my responsibility to cater to your ego. Just because another man enjoys my attention does not mean that I'm forbidden to acknowledge it. I only mean there is nothing between Sir Henry and myself. I have consented to this meeting only to gather more information. The presence of the doctor is worrisome, and we do not yet know what he knows of Sir Charles' passing.
There is nothing for him to discover, so he must know nothing at all. It will be simple enough to blind him to our intentions with Sir Henry.
Our intentions? Surely you do not mean. You do mean. But to the same end.
And the sooner the better. So go, earn his trust. If you can acquire a garment, all the more useful you will be. I will be watching.
I was beginning to think you'd never sent for me.
I hoped that you would have taken my word and that there would be no need for me to summon you. You must listen to me, Sir Henry. Hear me when I say to oppress your feelings, I will suppress mine.
So you admitted you do have feelings for me.
I cannot deny it, Sir Henry, but my circumstances are more complicated than you can possibly imagine. You must take my advice that you leave Baskerville Hall as the most earnest expression of my ardent affection.
I can never be happy if I leave this place.
Well, I will never
Leave
be
you here.
happy until you do leave.
And I can see only one path forward. We must arrange to have you leave this place as my wife.
Sir Henry, this is not what I intended. I have complicated matters entirely.
On the contrary, Beryl, I see things clearer now than I ever have before. I love you, Miss Stapleton. I will never be parting from you for the rest of my days.
Sir Henry!
What on earth are you doing with my sister?
Jack, please, he meant no harm.
Do you think because you're a baronet you can do what you like? These affections are most shameful.
Mr. Stapleton, I am not ashamed of my feelings towards your sister. In fact, I hope that she might honor me by becoming my wife.
Why, so you might have your way with her? To convince her to buy into your amorous intents? You would surely leave her destitute.
You take me for Jack. I would never. Henry would never.
Oh, so it's Henry now. Entirely too familiar. You've shamed us, Beryl. You will never see this man again. With me. Now!
There, Sir Henry. You know, I'm sure Mr. Stapleton is just being protective of his sister. You know those hot-blooded Baskervilles? You go secondly. Cup of tea?
That'd be delightful, thank you. I've made a fool of myself.
Beg your pardon. But, my brother, the convict, he mentioned something out on the moor last I brought him food. He said there was another man.
Really? That must have been who the doctor saw when we went out on the moor that night. Have you seen more of him?
No, I'm afraid so. But, I hope to God that he's gone and left this place behind. He has brought nothing but trouble here. Begging your pardon, sir, but, I believe I know why Sir Charles was out at that time of night. Who's to meet a woman?
How do you come to know of this?
That morning, there was a woman. There was a letter addressed to him. And later, I was cleaning his study, and I found the remnants of a letter.
Please, as you are a gentleman, burn this letter and be at the gate at 10 o'clock. LL.
That must be from Miss Laura Lyons. She lived in Plum Tracy. But she married an artist who came to sketch on the moor.
He proved to be a blackguard and deserted. The fault from which I hear may not have been entirely on one side. Her father refused to have anything to do with her because she had married without his consent, and perhaps for one or two other reasons as well. So, between the old sinner and the young one, the girl has had a pretty bad time. Her story got about, and several people living here did something to enable her to earn an honest living. Stapleton did for one, and Sir Charles for another. It was to set her up in a typewriting business.
Make one another miserable, Sir Charles. He abandoned me, and I him, and I had hoped that this distance would bring us some peace. But it seems that peace is not in his grand design for me. I hate to be dramatic, but it seems like my life has been one incessant persecution from a husband whom I abhor.
A case for divorce cannot be granted without firm grounds. An accusation of adultery. Otherwise, he is within his legal rights to force you to live with him should he return to the home.
Well, I have it on good authority that he has been faithful to me, but the witness is reluctant to testify on my behalf.
Is there any means that would persuade the witness?
None within my control, which is why I have called you here today. Your kindness, your generosity has done more for me than words can say. I am ashamed to even ask.
Name their price, Miss Lyons. If your freedom can be regained by the meeting of expense, it would be my privilege to support you.
It means everything to me, Sir Charles. Peace of mind, happiness, self-respect, everything. There's just one more thing that gives me pause in asking. I would not have imposed upon your magnanimity today if I had not been motivated to do so by another.
You were supported by another friend?
I see, not just any friend. He has offered me marriage, and I intend to accept it. It is very honorable of him. Conditional, of course, that you divorce your current. And so I wrote to you to beg finances in this venture. Since sending the letter, however, I have told him of my intentions, and
Let me guess. Your suitor is a proud man?
he said it would hurt his self-respect to see another man find the money for such an object. It is foolish to me, and I designed to convince him otherwise, but that will take some time to do so. I hate to ask you to come all the way to Coombe Tracy, just to hear me ask Anderson's request. I hope you can forgive this back and forth, and I pray that I have not inconvenienced you so.
Laura, please, do Do not fret. I have no children of my own, as you know, and knowing your father, let me just say that I've always thought of you as the daughter I never had. Please do write to me again when you convince your paramour there is no shame in asking for help. No patriarchal possessiveness at play in this gesture on my part.
Only paternalistic care, Sir Charles. I will do so.
I'm always here and I will help however I can, you know this.
If this letter is from Miss Lyons, was she at the gate? And if not, why did she write to him and not come?
There has been no signal from my brother in days. I hope he has gone and left his gift behind.
And Miss Stapleton, a woman of such presence, I cannot believe that she would not readily leave her brother. What ties her to him? Who killed the convict?
Who's the mysterious figure on the door?
Who are the Stapletons, really?
Who is Miss Lyon's lover?
Who convinced her to betray him?
Who killed Sir Charles?
Who killed the hound at the Baskervilles?
No, not like this. Too many questions.
Daryl,
Tom Snow! What abrupt? No, of course not. If the convict is dead upon the moor, then it is Stapleton who is done the deed. Why?
Beg your pardon?
You've not explained anything about my motivations. Who is this man to me? Why would I kill him? Well, he finds the hound. Did I keep the hound? Why?
Did Mr. Stapleton kill Sir Charles?
Did he send the letter?
No, well, in a way. Mr. Stapleton was wooing Miss Lyons and convinced her to write it.
Why would he have wanted to harm Sir Charles? He barely knew the man.
They moved here shortly after he did.
Yes, you see? No, there's still too many knots left to untie. The mysterious figure, more importantly, the hound. Is the hound real? Yes, well, no, not in the way you imagine. Look here. Come now, become the hound, coated in phosphorus, starved, sent to track the Baskervilles. But why, stubborn imagination? Stapleton keeps a dog, paints it, and lets it roam the moors. It is heard by all. But why? They want the fortune, the estate.
Both Mr. and Mrs. Stapleton?
Well, perhaps. I don't know.
Would they ever get the estate?
I cannot explain it. They're the villains. Mr. Stapleton, at the very least, is. Wait. Just wait. are not what they say they are. Jack Stapleton is, in reality, the son of the deceased Roger Baskerville, younger brother of Sir Charles. He married Miss Beryl Garcia, and the two moved to Devonshire in an attempt to lay their hands on the family fortune. Masquerading as brother and sister, they gained Sir Charles' trust and used the old man's weak heart and fear of the curse of the hound to orchestrate his demise. Mrs. Stapleton tricked Miss Lyons into believing he would marry her, and so gained power over her to trick Sir Charles. Miss Stapleton, conflicted as she was of her husband's intentions, could not marry Sir Henry, but desperately wanted him to avoid Sir Charles's fate. Enraged at her betrayal, he ties her up and leaves her to die, then sends the hound after Sir Henry. I kill the hound, of course, and Stapleton dies, wandering the mire, trapped without his elaborate signage. See? See? You're right. I'm nothing without him.
What do you make of this case, Gregson?
The story's supernatural element is resolved. It's quite cut and dry. I dare say I would have begun my own investigation with a closer examination of the Baskerville family tree, and upon finding Roger's son, all is quite clear.
I've always thought detective stories were highly imaginative, and here I am, unable to imagine one without Sherlock at the center of it all.
For what it's worth, I'm not able to imagine one without him either. But look around. This world you've created is imaginative without you. And without him. None of this would be happening without you initially, and yet it's all still happening in spite of your departure from the story.
Not so fast, Libet. It's you know what? Just one second.
I should not have been so standoffish with you earlier.
I feel I owe you an apology as well, Mrs. Hudson.
Martha, please.
You must call me Irene. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again, lads.
Suppose it's good to see you again too, you big Columbus.
Lestrade, tea leaf means an affectionate.
That's an astute, Mr. Myers. You're natural.
I learned from the best, Holmes.
And he was. The best.
I certainly did not mean to say... I'm sorry, Mycroft. I cannot imagine the depth of the loss you feel.
Profoundly illogical though it may be, I'm coming to terms with the fact that I am no longer in control of this world.
And how's that make you feel? To be nothing more than an outside observer.
No, there's a likely path forward for you that doesn't involve carrying on the legacy of a criminal mastermind. Moriarty is gone. You aren't beholden to him anymore.
Perhaps not, but beholden is not quite the same as commitment, Mrs. Watson. I have a sense of loyalty and I'm not so quick to abandon.
That sounds profoundly illogical. Sherlock was not my son. I know this.
But I cannot help but feel the grief of a parent whose child has pressed before them from an early grade.
Small wonder then that you've been steeped in denial.
You know, I've been doing some thinking. Well, not colorful, not the colorful vocabulary on you. The inspect part.
Finally catching wise to what the public says about you, eh?
The public is saying. Forget it.
It is a rule that has likely become me all my days. At least I'm comfortable in this complicated time with you all, though. We always, as I've always said, isolationist tendencies. But the truth is, we're much better off not.
There's always a place for you at Scotland Yard after all this is over. I know the detective life is not for you, but we're better off not alone either.
Honestly, it's a relief. I've been trying so desperately to hold on to so many things. My reputation, my family, my livelihood, that to relinquish power over this is refreshing.
You don't have to make a discovery anymore. You can see the world in your eyes. You can delight in our successes and laugh at our foibles.
Haven't you ever found yourself devoted to a cause that would be easier to abandon than stay faithful to?
Well, sometimes it's not so simple.
I can deny it no longer, I do. But even in these remarkable circumstances, I would find myself thinking about and grappling with what life would be like without Sherlock.
I thought I knew what life was like without him. We rarely saw each other, and my life was full and vibrant, and I was happy. And yet, when I received the news of his death, I couldn't bear to imagine it.
Without Sherlock, well, all this business of him being, well,
In the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns?
yes. He's dead, and I'll be damned if I know how to proceed.
He did solve nearly every case for you and Gus head upon a mop stick over there.
I'll write that one down.
Would you be serious about the old truncheon?
I almost wish he wouldn't. Someone more competent may take his place when they trouble for us. Plus, I've grown accustomed to his face.
You know I can hear you go, right? All these years, on the institution, I'm starting to lose faith in it. I've always thought we were there to serve and protect, to support and empower the people, but day after day goes by, where I find myself pardoning my biases, and selecting one type of criminal as my superiors want me to do. Sherlock never believed in any of that. He believed that any person could commit any crime, no matter the race, the class, the creed. It was objective, always looking at the facts.
It's like you've been doing a lot of thinking, Lestrade. I know that doesn't come easy for you.
Oh.
I can certainly make myself available from time to time as a consulting candidate.
I know the memories are not wholeheartedly positive. I tried to make him perfect. He was far from it. Not perfect. A quintessential detective. Logical, righteous, with a few vices, but none that prevented him from saving the day when called upon.
A single-minded genius, motionless for a few short moments of tenderness. An addict with a penchant for bees, violin, and mechanical contraptions. I have known a few detectives, but I wouldn't say Sherlock was like any of them.
He became more real than I could have ever imagined. It still remains a mystery to me as an author. The Sherlock I thought I created pales in comparison to the one you all have come to know.
So how do you know when to let go? Or if it would be worth your while to go on, to see what would come from it?
It doesn't have to be the same as it was.
I'm sure it's easy for you to find someone to blame for his loss. Even Sherlock himself. You find yourself blaming Mr. Doyle as well.
I think, now that I see him, I can understand why he did it.
His life seems no less complicated than ours. And he made a choice, one that we all must live with.
You know, I have been thinking of taking a new occupation lately as a private consultant. I know I could never replace Sherlock in all that he did, but, you know.
Thinking of turning Scotland Yard upside down?
Yes, to make the world a better place. As a private consultant. Once again, never could replace Sherlock and all he did.
Do you help me get started in the train?
Yes, that'd be wonderful.
I've got just the office space in mind. Near our place in Bethnal Green.
You have my humblest thanks.
About time you acknowledged our professional prowess, Meter.
Oh, quiet and ash gaps.
So, what do you think you'll do?
Although I know now that it would do none of us any good to bring it back the way you have the power to do so, I do have a proposal for you.
What is it?
Can you envision a world where someone else wrote stories featuring Sherlock Holmes? A continuation of his adventures, both real and not real.
There will always be new obstacles to overcome.
And by someone else? You mean you would remain a fiction?
Even to myself.
I think we are perhaps living more thoughtfully with his changed choices than he could ever have predicted. So no, Martha, I'm not angry at him. Not anymore. What's past is past. I still mourn his loss,
As to I, my dear. But the world's been madly on, is it not?
As madly as ever.
But aren't you just saying the same out of convenience? Out of fear?
I mean, isn't that why anyone does anything at all?
To the contrary, I believe that it is love that drives us at our core.
I fear then that you and I do not see eye to eye on this matter.
Agreed. Have you spent much time
It's not
in
in Paris, I think, following this adventure. Have you heard any news of the Dreyfus affair?
Nasty business, but if anyone can solve it, it'll be you.
I like the way you think, John. Believe me, I had very little to do with that. How would you feel about bringing this to your council of peers? I do not know by what power I am given the chance to speak to you all with such clarity, but I am grateful for this moment. This time, I owe you all an apology, which I would like to do so by sharing a bit about myself, which you would have no cause but to know through these interactions. Like John, I am a doctor. I've studied medicine all my life and have sought out opportunities to minister to the health of others, even in the cannon's mouth, even within my own family. My beloved wife, Louisa, and I met most unexpectedly through my line of work. I thank the stars that allow us to be together every day, despite the pain and grief her tuberculosis has caused us both. And yet, my heart has been laid claim to by another. I am loyal to my marriage and will be till the end. But even so, I have love for both Tui and Jean. Can it even be so?
You find yourself coldly on the pages of your story.
I've written much outside of your world. True stories of my life, the lives of figures I know and venture, countless hours of historical research.
Your public, though, cares much more about our world than those others. You resent the success of Sherlock's little mysteries.
I found myself increasingly thoughtless, careless as I wrote your narratives. I never gave you the chance to learn and solve mysteries on your own without the aid of Sherlock. You were never even mentioned in passing, so Sherlock loved you deeply. Invaluable influence, a life-changing encounter with the only person, no, not just women, to ever outwit the famous detective. To have you never appear again? And of course, the incomparable Miss Hudson kept the whole Baker Street complex spinning on its axis.
Glimpses, fragments. You allowed your narrative to become fragmented, unreliable. Through John's retelling of the truth, you let yourself off easy dismissing his biases or even for inconsistencies.
I became frustrated with the public's fever for a more substanceless narrative. No depth, no character, only clever twists and turns and a dashing figure to tell how it all came to pass. I began to craft mysteries that would only be solvable by Sherlock. That is to say, by a genius, diminishing the power of each of you, limiting your potential, your creativity.
And so you put him up so high that you made him practically untouchable.
You needed an impossibly brilliant mind to defeat him.
Nearly mythological in reputation, there was only one way out of the final problem for either man. I am sorry, nonetheless, for how I brought his life to an end. It was too rash, too sudden.
Too like the lightning, which doth cease to be ere one say like this.
What other end would befit my brother then? Suppose there is a world in which he retires quietly to the countryside with his bees, content to rest on his laurels after the vanquishment of all evil.
He would not have wanted such a death, for all his rational detective reasonings. He was impulsive and passionate.
Sherlock never would have left the capture of Moriarty to Scotland Yard. Just as well, I fear it's been corrupted by spies.
The highs and lows of his relationship with drugs. No matter your intent, Mr. Doyle, that path so often leads to a much more dismal end than you gave him. You have our gratitude for that.
Your apology is heard for what it's worth that you took him from us so soon, suddenly. And it means something profound to hear how it came about and why. And we're fortunate to have the chance to talk with you about things so far from our control.
Yes, but to what end?
Death is sudden, often cruel in its timing. So many losses in this world have no precedent, no reasoning. While you give a sense to what we thought of as a senseless loss, we are still left with our grief. It is not so unwieldy as it once was, but the grief remains. For all of us. It will continue, but so will Sherlock. Not return to this world. No, we cannot bring back what was meant to pass. But we can bring love, care, and attention to the world of fiction he belongs to. Like Mr. Doyle, I wrote a version of Sherlock that detailed a faultless master at work. I did so because I loved him. But I have a new love for him now. I wish to continue his adventures, adventures that will include all of us, or, if you wish, leave us out completely. I intend to take care of these stories, and to let him live out his best life in the pursuit of justice, without his troubling natures that worried so many of us.
These are your stories now. You have my blessing, not that you need it. To be honest, they were never mine once they left my hands.
Feels like a weight has been lifted.
That's the force of destiny to you.
So what? We're just supposed to reconstruct our entire lives?
This isn't revisionist history, though. I suppose John is entitled to write retrospectively. But for us, this is building the path forwards.
Doctor, might I make a request? When you write our Sherlock, can you leave out the morphine and cocaine?
Yes, he will return a sober and striving man.
So, in your stories, Watson, Sherlock will keep solving mysteries with us, right? The biggish and irregulars will remain essential to his discoveries?
I guarantee it.
Martha and I plans to go to Paris.
Au revoir, Miss Lee.
Merci beaucoup.
Not to jump on the bandwagon, but I've been summoned by dear friend Miss Bernhardt on behalf of Captain Dreyfus to close military trials whose results have divided the Francophone world, the most shocking miscarriage of justice and blatant example of anti-Semitism.
You're bound to have some influence, my friends. And we're sure to hear of your efforts and support you from afar.
Thank you, Tobias. I'll be sure to update you on any policies enacted that can help our own faculty source the less biased from else.
And in this house, we always did talk about having kids. Oh, you sure taught so many mouths to feed?
Sherlock's estate is set to provide for the irregulars ad infinitum. Don't worry for one moment about money, Mary.
Oh, then of course you will live with us.
Well, Creator, are you also feeling an indescribably complex mixture of melancholy and gratitude? Or is it just me?
I've often thought that work is the best antidote to sorrow. I've never been proven more right than seeing the lot of you come to life without me.
Perhaps, though, Gregson and Lestrade, our first order of business should be catching the escaping criminal Moran.
I'll always run from you.
No part of you wants to let this go.
He wants. Perhaps. All my life, I've thought what I want, said it. So yes, Mary, it may be fear that drives me. Is that what drives you?
No. I choose to stay out of the room. Though I will say, the Mrs. Watson of your story should be a little firmer with her husband. Prevent him from taking such a dangerous voyage. Take advice. And for his husband, she would say that no matter who and how he loves, she will stay by his side, to whatever is.
Well, we really must be getting on our way to Paris.
You know, I think I figured out the title of this next story. The Empty House. What better place to start the narrative than from distancing ourselves from Now this one. In this house, there is but one man, lonely. But little does he know, this house will never be empty again.